Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm speaking with Richard Swinburne, the distinguished philosopher of religion, a retrospective of his views and arguments over his illustrious career, including on the Christian God and providence and the problem of evil. Richard is Emeritus Professor of the Philosophy of the Christian Religion at the University of Oxford. Richard, your book, Faith and Reason, is the third of your trilogy on the philosophy of theism. It is less well known than the other two, the Coherence of Theism and the existence of God. What are the core ideas of faith and reason?
Well, religions, and certainly the Christian religion, commends the virtue of faith. We should have faith in Christ, faith in God, faith in Christ, faith in the items of the creed. And that is a commendable virtue. And the book is about what faith means, and there are different ways I'll spell out of what it might mean, and which of them would be a virtue, which of them would be worth having, and why. And I will suggest three theories of what faith is. I say the Christian religion has never defined this term, although it uses it all the time. Indeed, unfortunately, the Latin word for it is also the word for belief, and so is the Greek word pistis, fides and pistis. And there are two sorts of belief. There is belief that and belief in. Now, belief that is the familiar kind of believing that certain things are so, believing that I am talking to you now, believing that it's a sunny day outside, believing that the Battle of Hastings was fought in 1066. And the fundamental notion here, I think, is believing one thing as opposed to another, and the other is the negation of that. So it's believing that I am talking to you is more probable than I am not talking to you. And that's the basic concept in which belief that is to be analyzed. Belief in is a bit different, and it's belief in which the Nicene Creed affirms. It starts, we believe in God the Father, etc. And it's that I think is faith, but that can be understood in various ways. And in the Christian tradition, various theologians have understood it in different ways. Some of them have understood it simply as believing that. And they have said that the virtue is to be, not merely to believe, but to believe strongly that so-and-so is the case. To believe strongly that there is a God, that he is omnipotent, that he became in Christ. And if you don't believe strongly, then you're not a true Christian. And some have said that. Certainly, many have said that. But others have said, no, it does involve an element of belief, but it's really a matter of trust and acting on the assumption that these beliefs are true. It is living your life trusting in God and trusting in the items of the creed. That is to say, guiding your life on the assumption that they are true, although it does involve not a strong belief, but some sort of belief of moderate strength that they are true. And the other extreme is it's simply a matter of acting on the assumption that they are true. It doesn't matter whether you believe them or not. Now, the first view I read in Clement of Alexandria. The second view and it's been attributed falsely, I think, to Aquinas, who says that, who extols the virtue of faith, but says that the sort of belief that is necessary for salvation is formed belief formed by love, and that sort of does collapse into the second theory, that it's acting on the assumption that the Christian religion is true. And the third view, that it's just acting as that of William James. Which of these is desirable? If, on the assumption that the Christian religion is in fact true, of course it would be desirable that you should believe it strongly. But it wouldn't seem to be necessary for the practice of the Christian religion that is so. You could put your trust in it and live on the assumption that it's true, and believe it to some extent without doing that. And of course, I think many believers, probably most believers, are in that situation. It would, of course, I think, be very silly simply to act on the assumption and have no view about whether it's true or not. There wouldn't be any justification for it. But there is a justification for acting on something, even if on balance you don't believe it to be true. So on balance, it's rather less probable than not. I mean, extreme examples can do that out. If the one thing you want in life is £1 million, and the only way to get £1 million is to buy a lottery ticket, then and you believe you won't get it because your innumerable other people have bought lottery tickets. Nevertheless, it's sensible to buy a lottery ticket because that's the only thing you want. Now, that's an extreme example, but let's take a slightly different one. Suppose you find yourself in enemy country in the time of war, which has broken out. And the one thing you want to do is get out of the enemy's territory. And you present yourself to, you think, well, how am I going to do that? I must ask the help of some citizen of the country. But of course, you reasonably believe that most citizens of the country will simply hand you over to the police and you wouldn't get out. So what you have to do is to hand yourself over in order to get the one thing you want to get, is to hand yourself over to the person who is least likely, even though least likely to hand you over, even though on balance it's probable that he will. And that is very simple. So what should guide you in choosing religions is not merely the probability of their truth, but also whether what they offer is you regard as a great thing, a price worth paying. It is the pearl hidden in the field, for which you give all you have in order to buy it, as in Jesus's parable. And what does Christianity offer? Well, it offers a way of living, which for other reasons is a good thing on the whole, and also would be very good if the hypothesis is true. And it offers you also, tells you will get help in living that good life from God, and you will live after your death a good life also. And that is a goal greatly worth having, that you should please God and that you should continue to live in interaction with him. And if the only way you can get that is to put your trust in him, then it's reasonable to put your trust in him, even if on balance you don't think he exists. And I think that is the right way to understand faith. It means, of course, that you must compare religions on that basis, and you may rule out certain religions because their creedal claims are improbable, but you may rule out other religions because you think that what they offer isn't nearly as good as what the Christian religion offers. So that is my account of faith.
Richard, you note in the second edition of Faith and Reason that it is in part a response to positions and arguments put forth by, independently, of course, Alvin Plantinga and John Hick. And I'd like to discuss each in some depth. So, Alvin Plantinga talks about a warranted Christian belief, which you characterize as externalist, that the nature of the process for that belief, if your cognitive abilities are not impaired, et cetera, et cetera. And you contrast it with your own approach, which is an internalist, introspective, related to one's other belief. Now, I know you and Al Plantinga have very similar actual beliefs, but in terms of this warranted internal externalist belief, like to explore the difference.
Yes, Plantinga has a rather complicated definition of warrant. If I remember rightly, a belief is warranted if it's produced by a reliable process. And I'm afraid, not having the text in front of me, there are one or two other conditions, but these other conditions, and certainly they produced by a reliable process, are not ones to which you necessarily have access. You don't know whether it's, and therefore you can't be guided by it if you don't know, because you don't know whether it's warranted. How on earth can you choose to have a warranted belief? So I don't think it's much of a recommendation for how one should proceed in these matters. And it seems that there are ways in which one should proceed in these matters. I have given arguments to show that there are good arguments for the existence of God and for the truth of the Christian religion. And if these arguments are available to people, they should have a look at them, and they should have a look at the contrary arguments and make up their own mind as to the probability on the evidence. And they should make up their own mind on the probability of on the worthwhileness of what the religion offers. That's something they can do, and they can be commended or not commended for doing or not doing it. But warrant, you can't do anything about.
But Warren would help you understand that if you have a belief that's caused by a damaged brain, then that belief would be less warranted because there's some physical impairment involved.
Yes, but if you knew that, you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, but you wouldn't. That's true, but it's really looking at it from a third person point of view.
My point is that if you have a belief, you really have the belief, you will believe that its causes are not the sort of causes that you suggest. But the further question is, if you have a belief, what justifies you in holding it? Or what warrants you in holding it? And Plantinga's answer is if it is produced by a reliable process. But how do you know it's produced by a reliable process? Well, you've got to have a warranted belief that it's produced by a reliable process.
But that's not something you can know, but it's something that objectively one can know. Take.
Oh yes, sure, yes.
Take schizophrenia.
Yes,
schizophrenia.
right.
I think I'm God, and my mother thought once in a while that I was thinking that. But seriously, if you have a mental condition that you think you're God or you're Jesus or whatever,
Yeah.
a third person objectively could look at that and say that's not warranted because the process is bad because there's some cognitive impairment.
Oh, yes, sure. But my point is that it's no guide for the believer as to whether he is justified or not justified in holding the belief. And this is what inquirers want to know. Would I be justified in holding this belief or would I not? And it doesn't seem to me the theory of warrant is much help, because that's an account of if I've got it. But maybe you're right. Maybe, as it were, well, one could say if I had this belief, then it would have been caused in certain ways. And if I didn't have that belief, then it would be caused in certain other ways. And then I have to investigate whether it is caused in these ways. And once again, we are down to having a warranted belief about how it's caused.
Uh, and so, from an introspective and internalist point of view that you espouse, it's related to one's other beliefs, but that then it becomes circular because one belief is then dependent upon the other belief, and there seems to be no grounding for the whole process.
Oh, we always start anything at all, from the beliefs that we've got. We are where we are at a certain point in time, and I have these beliefs. But I also have beliefs about what justifies a belief internally, and I'm looking for a true belief, and therefore I am looking for evidence that one belief is more probably true than another, and that way I can make progress.
Okay, let's move on to John Hick. And we've had both Al Flanagan and John Hick on Closer to Truth, and people can watch them describe their views better than I'll describe their views. So John Hick was originally a Christian and then grew to a deeper appreciation of other faiths, particularly Eastern, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. And he devolved something called the real, which he talked about more as an infinite, transcendent, divine reality in some very general sense. It's could be argued it's the lowest common denominator that unifies all the great religions. And then each specific religion, which superficially sound contradictory, are really the specific doctrines are myths in the anthropological sense, that all major religions of the world are salvific. You can achieve the same ultimate result in a good life or an afterlife or whatever it is. And they're all the same, but they're different directions, and the apparent contradictions are myths.
Well, so he says, but they don't look like it. And the Christian religion is captured by the Nicene Creed, and it seems very different from other religions. Some Islam, for example, doesn't believe that God is three persons of one substance, and it says so in the Quran that this is a mistaken belief, and it certainly doesn't believe that God became incarnate. I think that's also in the Quran, that this is a heresy. And you have to give people credit for if it seems pretty obvious to them that belief systems are incompatible with each other, and they do look that way. It's pretty ill justified in saying really they're all the same. They're not all the same, and they offer different things too. What he says is, they've all got the same goals, but that's certainly not true. I make in the book Faith and Reason, I compare the Christian system with Buddhism in this respect. Buddhism firstly, it has different different ideals from Christianity, because it doesn't think desire is a good thing at all. Christianity thinks desire is a good thing, so long as it's the right sort of desire for people's well-being, people's happiness, your own happiness if it doesn't affect anybody else. Buddhists are told not to follow their desires, and what they offer in the end is nirvana, but they cannot give the slightest idea of what nirvana consists in, except it is in the absence of desire and what? Yes, you're left with something. And Christianity is, of course, a lot more similar to Islam. They both have a supreme God and so on, but they are manifestly incompatible on the rest of their creeds, and I think their ideal of heaven is a little different. It seems, but I think I won't talk about that because I am talking from memory, and I would be libeling Islam if I did that.
Look,
But
let's differentiate between those religions that are theistic, which have a monotheist, generally Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Certain schools of Hinduism are theistic, maybe a little bit different, but they are. From the non-theistic religion, certainly Buddhism is the most prominent. So in the theistic religions, I mean, I can argue Hick's position that the Trinity or monotheism, I mean, there's so many similarities. The heaven may be described different, but if you go into different sects of Judaism, Kabbalah, whatever, heaven is described in a zillion different ways, and they all sort of have a ring of absurdity to them, in a sense. And I don't use that pejoratively. I just mean it just seems wildly different. But at their core, the Abrahamic religions have a God. They have a moral principles, and they have an afterlife. And the afterlife has different degrees or different levels of it, and at the highest level, it's glorious, beatific, or whatever it is. I mean, those are very substantial similarities, and the specific difference in the Trinity and the incarnation are the obvious ones. I can put myself in a frame of mind that that's not all that important.
Well, I agree with you. There are these very considerable similarities, and the religions admit that there are these very great similarities. Islam goes in for the kind of proofs of the existence of God that I go in for example. But there are differences, significant differences, important differences, and Christianity says you must rely on Christ and his church, and that you must rely on his atoning sacrifice and ask God to forgive you in the light of that. And it has certain precepts for living a good life. So there are differences, but then the issue turns on which is the most probably true. If you think that what they offer is somewhat similar, I should add that, of course, Judaism officially is not committed to life after death, and I think Islam has a bit of a different idea of it, but apart from that, the issue is which is most probably true, which way to this life after death, and which sort of good life in the respect of relation to God the sort of relation you ought to try and have to God, is the most probably true. And I think there are good arguments for the particular Christian view. And I think that there's no good reason to suppose that God dictated the Quran to Muhammad. There's no miracles to base it up. There's no reason why one should believe what it's in, except that what's in it, except that Muhammad says this. And indeed, it makes a virtue of the fact that Muhammad didn't do any miracles connected with it. So I don't think that the evidence supports Islam's differences from Christianity, and for that reason, I think one should be a Christian rather than a Muslim.
Richard, what is the underlying theory of the Trinity in Christian doctrine, and how do your views align with traditional views?
Well, I think they align very well, but there are a few other theories of the Trinity around than mine. But the clear account, it seems to me, contained in the Nicene Creed is this: each person of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, has the same divine essence. That is to say, they are each omnipotent, omniscient, etc. The other two depend for their existence on the Father. The Father begets the Son. The Father either with the Son or through the Son produces the Spirit. Now, why should this be the case? All my arguments for the existence of God are in fact arguments to God the Father, because they're arguments to a unique being. But the Father, being perfectly good, would wish to share all that he has with another, because he would not wish to keep this to himself. And so for that reason, he would, from eternity, always produce the Son. Augustine said this, that if God couldn't beget the Son, he would be omnipotent, and if he could but didn't, he would have been jealous. But a twosome can be a rather selfish twosome, and what this is one of the reasons why parents have children. So one of the good things that if you share something with someone else, if you share all your existence with someone else, is that you will want that someone else to love and be loved by yet a third person. Parents, a father, a human father who gets married, will want his wife, he thinks she's such a good thing, to have someone else to love. He will want to be selfish in his love, and he will want that his wife to be loved by someone else, because she's so good. He would want someone else to share that in. And that is why there is a third person, because a threesome is all. You always have to have a threesome. Three is the necessary unit for unselfish love, whether among humans or others, for this reason. And so, from eternity, God will do that. But an argument is produced, and the last point about unselfish love was produced by Richard of St. Victor in the 11th century. I don't think anybody had seen it before. But the reason why the Christian Church believed in the Trinity is they thought it was part of the original deposit of faith, and they only thought about, well, why should it be the case afterwards? And the first one is first point of the case is to share, and the second point of the case is that the love must be, you need a third for unselfish love. But then the opponent may say, why not go on forever? Why not have more and more gods? And the answer to that is, and it's my answer, this: before God, there is always, or often, a choice of good things to produce, such that there is no maximum of that choice. Forget this example for the minute. If humans are a good thing, then surely 11 humans are better than 10. A trillion humans are better than a trillion minus one, and so on and so on and so on. There is no maximum. And in the situation where there is no best of all possible goods, what a good agent can... If a good agent produces just some of them, that will be enough. Okay. But then, if 3 is enough for God to satisfy the demands of perfect goodness, then any 4th divine being produced would be produced by an act of will, because God wouldn't have to produce it. Whereas the traditional doctrine is that the other 2 persons are produced by an act of essence. That is one that God, in virtue of his perfect goodness, can't help producing. But the 4th one would be a voluntary act, and no 4th person can therefore, as it were, exist necessarily, because he would be produced by a voluntary act. And so there couldn't be a 4th divine person for that reason. And that is my justification of the final step in the argument.
And the Trinity is monotheism, you claim, not tritheism.
Yes, because all the persons have the same divine essence. They all know exactly what the others are doing. They all act together, and the actions of whatever it is, the Son, are always backed by the push of the other 2. That arrangement, of course, can only be made if each of them has a recognized sphere of where they are the lead person, as it were, and the others back them up. And who will decide that? Well, the Father will obviously decide that, because he decides he is responsible for the others. So, given that, as it were, that ensures there is no competition. I mean, competition between one of the Trinity doing one good thing and the other of the Trinity doing one incompatible good thing, because there are often many incompatible goods. Then each will, as it were, have a sphere of influence, and only the Son became incarnate, only the Spirit inspires the Church, and so on. So the Trinity always act together, and always back each other's activity, and therefore everything that is produced by God and everything that's known by God is the same. And that's what makes it not tritheism. They are not independent deities.
Okay, a couple of short questions. You say the Father produces the Son, and perhaps both together produce the Holy Spirit, the word produce. How can you have produce apply to eternal beings that are all co-eternal in their temporality?
Oh, very easily. For each period of time in, say, the Son's existence, going back forever, the Son is the Father is the cause of that by a previous action, immediately previous action, which causes that, and therefore both both the Father and the Son go back to eternity. It's always been happening, and therefore there is. I mean, there's a simple example. I mean, an old religious view was that the world was held up by a turtle who held it up forever.
Right.
But the fact that the turtle held it up forever doesn't mean that the turtle wasn't the cause of it being there.
How can omnipotence, the power to do anything, apply to more than one person or one locus of will, or whatever you want to call each member of the Trinity?
Well, because for the reason I gave, that each is the lead party, and if each knows what and the lead party will know it will only be good to exercise their power in that particular region, and therefore there will be no conflict between them so long as they're all perfectly good, and ex hypothesi they are.
Various adjectives have been used to describe the Trinity, and let me give you some and just get your overall reaction. The so-called social Trinity, three independent persons, the so-called economic Trinity with separate roles, the ontological Trinity that are co-equal natures, the Latin Trinity where each divine person is in some sense all of God. And then there's also something like a temporal Trinity, where the Trinity are actually phases over time of the one God. So many different theories of how the Trinity is still monotheism.
Yes. Well, my theory is usually said to be a social theory of the Trinity. All I can say is that many of these theories are very modern theories, which wouldn't have pleased the fathers of the Second Ecumenical Council. As I read the history of Christian theology, my view is the correct one. That's all I can say. And it does the job of interpreting, in my view, what the early fathers were getting at.
What has given you the most difficulty or the biggest challenge in your argument and discussion of the Trinity?
Well, I don't think anything is. I think that's an argument I'm very happy with.
Richard, what is your underlying theory of the incarnation, and how do your views align with traditional views?
Well, the doctrine of the incarnation is very clearly stated by the Council of Chalcedon, that the second person of the Trinity, the Son, who has essential divine nature, also acquired a human nature at his conception or birth. And the question is, how do we interpret that? And I think the best, as it were, analogy is provided by Freud, not for this purpose, but for dealing with ordinary humans. Freud drew to our attention the fact that some people have divided minds. They do certain actions and hold certain beliefs, which form one system, and act in accordance with them, and they have another system of beliefs which they act in accordance with, and these are conflicting, and people, when they're acting in one way, are only half aware of the other system, and that makes sense. Or if it makes sense of human beings, it makes sense of the incarnation. But of course, in the case of humans, it's a deficiency. It's not a good thing to be in that state. But that doesn't rule out the fact that there might be a case where it is a good thing to be in that state. And I think the incarnation is such a condition. So I think that the second person of the Trinity acquired a human way of thinking and a human way of acting as well as the divine way. Jesus Christ acted in a human way when he suffered human pain, when he acquired also a body through which he acted, and suffered human pain, and suffered human ignorance on ordinary human matters. I dare say if someone asked him which is the road to Capernaum, he could give a false answer. I mean, not deliberately, but through ignorance. And he is reported to be often have been tired, and clearly he suffered much during his life, and his human physics and what he did with his body was limited by his human beliefs. And the human nature is a separate nature. It's not a merged nature. The Chalcedon was very clear about this. The two natures are not mixed up. They're kept. And the divine nature, Christ in his divine nature, is still acting at the same time. But of course, occasionally these natures have got to make contact because Christ, one of the functions of Christ is to teach us things we wouldn't otherwise know, but God alone knows, and to let people know that he is God incarnate, which of course he can't do unless there's some contact between the natures. But there again, I mean, the Freudian case illustrates that there is contact often. So that's my analogy.
I would think that if Jesus in his earthly life had was cognizant of the fact that he was this omnipotent being from all eternity, it would blunt any human issues or problems. So does that mean that the divine aspect of Jesus, of the two natures, was more subverted, or
well, it's not. It wasn't normally when acting humanly and so on. He was not normally aware of it.
So not aware of it. That's an important point, because if he were aware of it the whole time, that I'm God and I can do anything, that would really blunt the experience as a human being.
Yes.
Okay, but at certain times that would emerge. Probably surprise them every once in a while. Hey, I'm this mortal being.
Well, yes. Wait a moment. The question is how he would show that he is God, and he certainly didn't show that he is God by going around and saying, "I am God," and there's a good reason for that. Actually, I mean, consider the general cultural ambience. The Jews were well aware of all sorts of pagan stories about gods who became incarnate and did things. And they would think that if he went about saying, "I am God," he was thinking, he was considering he was one of these pagan gods who popped it to earth for a little bit and then went away. And they wouldn't possibly understand that claim until after the crucifixion and the resurrection, when it would become clear what sort of God he was claiming to be. But I do believe he left certain clues in his actions, so that after the resurrection they could see that that was what he was claiming. For example, the charge against him at the trial by Caiaphas was blasphemy. Now, that didn't mean, as it were, he'd been cursing God. It means he'd been claiming divine privileges, whatever they are, claiming to do things and which God alone could do. And that was on record because it was it was the charge against him. And also, he forgave sins, and then it's Mark or Matthew, whichever gospel it is, said that the Pharisees around him said, "This is blasphemous. Who can forgive sins except God alone?" They are quoted as saying, and certainly after his resurrection, the Gospels record that the disciples worshipped him. So there are a lot of sort of clues, but pretty strong clues, but he wasn't as blatant as saying, "I am God."
When Jesus was in human flesh, what was the status of the Son person in the Trinity, which had been from all eternity? If the Son had existed as God in the Trinity for all eternity, was there an empty spot for these
No,
30
no, no,
years?
no, no, no. The doctrine is very clear about that. They he can't abandon his divinity. It's his nature, and there's just a nature added to him, and so he is still the in his divine nature continuing to act. It's just that he also acts in his human nature.
But the locus of that was not wherever it was from all eternity, but for a
No, no, no. It was the beginning when he became human.
yeah, and
From
but these 33 odd years were a kind of a special case in the flow of eternity.
there is the view. It's not, I think, uh, official doctrine, but it is normally thought that he retained his human nature when he took it to heaven. But it's unanimous that he only started to have a human nature at his birth or conception.
Richard, regarding the atonement, which is obviously a critical part of Christian doctrine, there are various theories that underlie the atonement: the ransom theory, satisfaction, penal substitution, moral influence. What is your view?
You're right. There isn't an official Christian view of how the Christ's life and death atoned for human sin, but among those you mentioned, I would take the sacrifice view. That is to say, and we have to go back one or two steps here. If I wrong you, do you wrong? Then I have certain obligations. I have the obligation to repent, to apologize to you, to recompense you for the wrong. If I've stolen something from you, I have to give it back, as well as uh, repenting and apologizing, and perhaps something else as well, which I call a penance. Now, Aquinas remarks, and I entirely agree with this, that repentance and apology have to be made by the wrongdoer, but the wrongdoer can be helped to make reparation and the penance by friends, and that is the crucial thing. When we do wrong to anyone, we also do wrong to God Himself, because if I hurt my neighbor, then I have hurt a child of God, and if you hurt someone's child, you hurt them. And I also have wronged him in the respect that I am his child, and I have wronged him by doing this sort of thing. So we do a lot of wrong, and we owe apology not merely to the individual whom we have harmed, but above all to God. And so we must apologize and repent, but we can be helped by God to make reparation. But of course, we don't. We go on committing sins, and God can help us by providing the reparation. Now, what we've wronged him in respect of is that we haven't led a perfect human life. But so God, the perfect reparation would be that we can offer to God another human life, which is perfect. And God himself may choose to offer such a life. And that is the atonement he made is by living and above all dying as a result of human malevolence in a very cruel way. And that life is the reparation he provides for us, and which we can avail ourselves of if we say to God, please, through Jesus Christ, accept his offering instead of what we owe. That is more or less what Anselm said, that God couldn't forgive us unless we offered reparation, even if it's Christ's reparation. But most theologians would deny that. Universally, God could have let us off without any atonement. But just as we think that those who have done serious wrong ought to make some reparation, so it's better if they do make such reparation, and if they can't, if someone helps them to do so. An analogy might be if my son breaks somebody else's window and has no money to pay for it. I can give him the money to pay for it, but he has to hand the money over and get the window repaired. And that is the parallel to apology and repentance. I would call that a sacrifice theory because that's the way the letter to the Hebrews describes it. And what we do is we sacrifice, that is to say, offer to God Christ's life and death. Of course, in ancient sacrifices, you ate the sacrifice, or some of it, afterwards. And St. Paul makes the claim that indeed we do that in eating the body and blood of Christ.
Is there some resonance with the old sacrifices in the Old Testament?
Yes, indeed. But of course, the Epistle to the Hebrews makes the point that those sacrifices were just of cattle and couldn't be a serious offering to God. But the idea that they had, and not merely the Jews, but neighboring peoples and so on, was that a sacrifice consisted of offering something to God, and you burnt it on the altar, and the smoke ascended to God, and as it were, he smelt it, and it was nice, and gives you back what is left of the sacrifice. Now, of course, that is a crude model, but the Epistle to the Hebrews makes that point. That's absurd. That's not big enough. But the point is that it is something we offer to God, Christ's life, and above all his death, for voluntary death, allowing himself to be killed for us. And we benefit by that if we accept the benefit and join the church.
Richard, with disputes among serious scholars about the historicity, the historical support for the resurrection of Jesus, if one believes in Jesus, cannot one take the resurrection on faith alone without needing historical support?
I think you have to adopt a historical view of what's happened, that is to say, that Christ in his earthly body rose from the dead, whether or not you believe there's good historical evidence for it. And I do believe there is historical evidence for it. And I think those who cast doubt on it, understandably, tend implicitly to be thinking in this way: people don't rise from the dead, so we need an awful lot of witnesses who saw it happen and touched him and so on. and we haven't got an awful lot of witnesses, only some. But that is an example of a principle of what's evidence for what, that you must take into account your background evidence, and their background evidence, the people who expressed this, was that people don't rise from the dead. So we need an awful lot of evidence that on this occasion they did. But if you assume, not assume, but if you think you have good reason to believe there is a God anyway, you have good reason to believe that this sort of thing could happen. And above all, you have good reason to believe that it might happen in connection with God incarnate. And so if you take that view, then you don't need as many witnesses of the sort you would need if you took this never happens as your background evidence. And I think implicitly that is what the argument turns on. Though those who Christians who believe, Christian theologians who doubt the historicity of the resurrection, doubt it because they doubt natural theology. But if they took natural theology seriously, they would realize that you need less evidence, much less evidence, because you've all got reason for believing there was a God who could do this thing, and also who would. Given that, I think there is indeed sufficient evidence that clearly the body wasn't in the tomb. That's St. Matthew in the last chapter just mentions casually that the Jews believed that the body had been stolen. And that implies that even the Jews believed it wasn't in the tomb. When there are a lot of witnesses, that is to say, all the apostles were witness to this, and the different New Testament writers had clearly different sources for their beliefs, and the apostles who did claim that he was risen, and that he was risen is a common to all the different sources in the New Testament, that he was risen. And the apostles were prepared to die for that belief, which is evidence that they really did believe it, and that they thought they had grounds for believing it.
Your argument that natural theology and the existence of God is the background evidence for how you judge this is, I think, a very profound understanding of your argument that some people could take as circular, because some people argue that the resurrection of Jesus proves the existence of God, and now you're using the existence of God to prove the resurrection. But I don't agree with that circular argument. But it can sound that way. But you have an independent view through natural theology, through your other work in the existence of God, that there is a God. And then when you have that as background evidence and then deal with the actual evidence, you don't need as much physical evidence as someone else who would not use that background knowledge.
Yeah.
I think that's a very profound way to think about it, and is really very, very helpful. Richard, what is your approach to eschatology, the doctrines of last things, the final destiny of human beings individually, and of humanity as a whole, and perhaps even also of the entire earth and of the entire universe?
Well, I have no doctrine at all of the future of the earth or of the universe, and I don't think that there is such a doctrine in Christian teaching. There's a doctrine about an end to the present order of things for human beings, and that might involve them living on a new earth or a new order in that earth. And of course, the apostles, first disciples, expected that to happen very soon, that there would be a second coming of Jesus, and this would happen. And of course, it didn't. Not it hasn't yet, that is to say. But it's there that in the simply that got this ordinary, the way we live now on this earth is going to come to an end, and it will come to an end by the visible manifestation of Christ. That is extremely vague how it could happen, and I have no view any more than that about that, and I don't think any Christian is required to have any more view except that the present order is not everlasting, and that God has not yet brought about the new order, and there's a good reason for this, because he is waiting for us to repent and change our ways, because if he comes these days, he will find a lot of unsatisfactory people, and he wishes to come to a world that is better.
So there are two ways.
But as regards individuals, and that is where there are more substantial doctrines.
Let's just deal with the current order for a second, then go to the individuals, because there are two ways to think about the putative return of Jesus. One, as you've stated, I believe, is that God is waiting for humanity to improve to a point where it's worth the Son, the second person in the Trinity, God, to come to earth, where earth would be worthy of it. The other view, which is perhaps more prevalent, is that Christ will come back when humanity is going to destroy itself unless Jesus comes back to save humanity from utter destruction.
No, I don't think that can be regarded the way you state it as a Christian doctrine. He's coming to initiate a new order and not to save the present order.
Not to save it, but if the present order would continue, humanity would be destroyed. So Jesus has to create a new order by force.
Yes, but it's a new order in which people go on living forever. And he will create scriptural words, a new heaven and a new earth. Now, I don't know what the new heaven is supposed to amount to. I mean, heaven was simply the surrounding atmosphere, really, as far as the average Jewish person thought about it. I mean, heaven meant, it's the same word, uranos, kaidon, for the sky as for heaven in the sense of the heaven that people go to. And I think that causes a lot of confusion. Well, my hypothesis, and it's only my guess, is that the reason why he hasn't appeared so far is he is waiting for us waiting for the world to be converted, because he told the apostles to go and preach his message to the whole world. But of course, the whole world hasn't heard that message, let alone in a serious way, for 2 millennia. And perhaps, that's only my suggestion, perhaps God is hoping that one day they will all hear and return. But that's only I have really no doctrine about this matter, and I don't think the church has a doctrine about this matter, about when and how he will manifest at this end of the present order, and what it will consist in.
Well, if he's waiting for the human beings to make a good and decent world, everything that I read, he still has a long wait.
Yes, well, that's quite right, quite so.
Let's deal with individual,
Yeah,
the eschatology for the individual in terms of the classical heaven, hell, purgatory, those kinds of
yeah,
areas where the church does have a more a fully formed doctrine.
yeah. Yes, well, at death, uh, um, there are different views in the church. The view of many Protestants is that at that time, well, there were some Protestants, is as it were, they cease to exist until a general resurrection of everybody, when the wicked are sent to an eternal hell and the good are taken to a eternal heaven. But the majority view among Protestants would be that when we die, our soul goes, is still kept alive and reunited with the body in the general resurrection of everybody. But the Protestant view is that our fate, as it were, is decided at death. If we have lived a good human life, then we go one way, or enough of a good human life to be penitent for the wrong, and we go one way, and otherwise we go the other way. But then the Catholic comes along and introduces the doctrine of purgatory, because, I mean, they really saw not everybody has, as it were, formed themselves when they die. And it's absurd to think that God is going to take some of these people who have a bit of us, have been good a bit in some ways, straight to heaven. They're just not fitted for it. So, purgatory, which only came into Catholic thinking in the 8th, 9th centuries, was thought of as a sort of antechamber to heaven. It's where people were sent to who had a bit of, were ultimately destined to heaven. They were on the right track, but they had to be purged. They had to be undergo various purgation in order to make them fitted for heaven. But the Orthodox, some of them believe that. Others of them believe, and I'm in the latter category, others of them believe that our fate is not entirely such, not for all of us, entirely settled at death, and that we do have a chance in the afterlife to form the character that we haven't formed on earth, and so to make ourselves fitted either for heaven or for hell. And that is accepted as a possible view by the Orthodox Church, and I accept that. That is to say, our fate is only settled at the general resurrection, when we are reunited with the body.
So, how would the post-death, pre-general resurrection occur? What would be the characteristics that one would need to go through to have some transformative events during that period of time?
I don't know, and there is no official view about this matter. All I'm saying is that the Catholic view, officially, is that our fate is settled at death, even though some of us have to be purged in some way or other in order to get to heaven. And one of the two, that is one of the views open to orthodoxy. The other view is that we still have an opportunity to form, to act so as to determine our final destiny. Not all of us, perhaps, but some of us who have unformed characters before the general resurrection. And I adopt that view for the obvious reason that a lot of people die without a formed character of any sort. Yeah, but I mean, that's as precise as I can get.
Look,
Because
that's fine. But at some point, there is a final determination. And,
yes,
and I've always been disturbed by a final determination, especially if it's a negative one towards hell in whatever form it is, in the sense that could it ever be the case that just deserts or a fair result of temporal sin or temporal lack of sufficient character would result in an infinite punishment for a finite transgression?
I have argued elsewhere that when people make bad choices and go on making bad choices, they gradually make a worse and worse character. And when they do that, they can eventually be in a stage where they are not morally sensitive. They don't recognize the difference between good and evil. There's an interesting paragraph in Solzhenitsyn's book, The Gulag Archipelago, where he comments about some of the interrogators whom he encountered, that some of them were sort of sensitive a bit to the good, and others seem to have lost that sensation, simply had no concept of morality at all. So they have, it's not, they're going to hell, whatever that amounts to, is not, as it were, a punishment for what they have done, but is something which they have chosen to be, because by their choices they have made themselves insensitive to the good, and so they can't recognize it and can't choose to do anything else unless God were to force on them a character which they had voluntarily chosen not to have, and that would be an imposition. You don't need to believe that there is a God in order to go to heaven or hell, but you do need to try to do the good. And if it comes to your notice that there is a God, that will obviously include pleasing him. But if you have no conception of the good, you're simply not fitted for heaven, and you've banished yourself. But what will happen to them? I don't go along with, if you take the biblical metaphors literally, there are burning flames involved. It's physical pain. But Augustine remarks, though he did believe that the real punishment, or however you phrase it, is damnation, and that means damnum is loss. Loss of God is the real punishment, even though the point of sensuous, the sensory punishments were also there. I don't see any need to believe in the sensory punishments at all. They may be, but I don't see any particular creedal reason to believe this. They have banished themselves from God, and what God will not do is give them a choice, any more choice, because he knows they will make the bad choice because they've eliminated the conception of the good. And bad choices are on earth a matter of hurting other people, but he's not going to allow them to hurt other people in this state, and therefore they're bound to be unhappy, because what they want to do they can't. They want to hurt other people, and they don't be any other people to hurt. I think he might well give them the choice, if they so want, simply to be eliminated. that would be indeed loss of God. If you look at the New Testament, the teaching of Jesus carefully, he often talks of the bad being thrown into the fire which burns forever. But if a fire burns forever, then anything you throw in it will not exist anymore. Only in one passage is he quoted by St. Matthew of saying that the fire will burn the people forever, but the other passages don't suggest that. So that is my view of hell.
Broadly, there are two extreme alternatives to the traditional ever-burning hellfire. On the one extreme, as you've described, is annihilationism, where the incorrigibly wicked are destroyed, they're not tortured forever. And the other extreme is universal salvation, which some Christian theologians, scholars have been more amenable to, I think, of recent times, where ultimately all human beings from all time are all saved through some post-mortem process.
Well, I don't accept that view, because I think that God gives us a choice of what sort of person we are to be. And some people, apparently, people Solzhenitsyn admit anyway, seem to, and other people whom we hear of and their lifestyle we hear of, seem to have totally eliminated their conception of the good by doing each time really bad actions and even more bad actions, so that it didn't, they're not doing them with a bad conscience. They've lost a conscience, and if you don't allow people to do that, then you have destroyed their autonomy. If in the end everyone's going to be saved, what's the point of the process if you don't let them choose their destiny? In a different episode, I quoted the idea of the parallel of a suitor. God can, like a suitor, asking the beloved to marry him. If the beloved refuses once, twice, 3 times maybe, okay, the suitor can ask again. But if the suitor asks an infinite number of times, that is an imposition. That is refusing to recognize the autonomy of the beloved, and likewise with God. So I think people have the opportunity finally to reject God, and so I don't go along with the everyone will be saved, but I do go along with the view that everyone will have plenty of opportunity to take good choices, and in the end they will separate themselves into those who will take enough choices for God to give them the benefit of the doubt.
On the happier side, just a few words, what can we say about heaven? I know it's very little. I guess my question is, what would we do for all eternity? I mean, I love, for example, Mahler's Second Symphony, but after a while it does get boring.
Yes, I think only the saints will be happy in heaven, because you often read these people who say, I don't want to live forever. And what they mean is they don't want to live the sort of life they live on earth, being the sort of people they are forever. And that is surely comprehensible. But the saint is one who wishes to do, tries to do what is good, and wants to go on forever, helping other people on earth, and go on forever coming to understand the goodness of God. The saints traditionally intercede for us before God, and that's just, as it were, one example of how they might help us on earth. But the various descriptions of heaven, which are few, goodness knows, by both in the New Testament and subsequently, imply first that it is a communal activity. Augustine made the remark that heaven being compared to a city shows that we do things together in it. It's not the solitary to the solitary. And the picture of heaven is in the book of Revelation and many other places, is that the worship of God is a central activity. And we come to know more and more about God and more about what he's like and what he's done. And it's a perpetual progress. I think Origen said that more and more and more getting, and God being infinitely good has infinite good aspects to be learnt about. And if God chooses, he can give us plenty of good things to help other people with. But who knows beyond that? But it will be a choice where a situation where we have chosen to be saints, and therefore there's no point in God tempting us in any way. We have formed our character, and so there will be no pain, but plenty of opportunity for developing our understanding of the good and our understanding of God, and being able in some way to help others who are not in that situation.
Richard, describe the arc of your intellectual journey, and it's a spiritual journey as well, your pursuits in philosophy first, and then the philosophy of religion.
I have always been religious, but in my teenage years, I became aware that the intellectual climate in Britain and indeed overseas was moving against religion, certainly in Western countries. And that for that reason, one's religious beliefs needed to be backed up by arguments in favor of them. And I was studying philosophy as part, the main part of my undergraduate degree, and I came to appreciate the standards of rigor and clarity which I found in philosophical discussion, although I didn't ascribe to the main fashionable beliefs of philosophers of the 1950s. Nevertheless, I appreciated their clarity and rigor. And so I went on to do graduate work in philosophy, but it also seemed to me that the paradigm of knowledge in the modern world was science. If you could show that religious beliefs were justified in the sort of way that scientific beliefs were justified, then that would be very much a good justification of them. But I didn't know much science, but I was fortunate enough to get a couple of research fellowships, which I devoted largely to study of various scientific theories, and above all of the history of science, of the reasons why people had jettisoned one theory and adopted another. And then when I went on to be a philosophy teacher, as a lecturer at the University of Hull, I devoted the next 10 years of my philosophical career to the philosophy of science. I wrote a couple of books. Space and Time was my first one. The issues have always been issues of interest to philosophers, but I wrote about them in the light of Einstein's work on relativity theory. and I applied that and considered what it meant and why one should believe it, or in certain respects not believe it. Then after that, I wrote another book called An Introduction to Confirmation Theory. Confirmation theory means a study of what is evidence for what. And I saw that the calculus of probability, and in particular the theorem of it, Bayes' theorem, captured the criteria which scientists and historians use when they assess whether a theory is probable or not. And then, with a change of academic location, when I became a professor at the University of Kiel, I devoted my time to theism, to saying what it meant, what it was to say that there is a God, what the hypothesis of theism amounted to, and then to consider whether it was probable on the evidence and what difference that would make to religious practice. And so I wrote my 3 books on the philosophy of theism: Coherence of Theism, The Existence of God, and Faith and Reason. And I then went on, most of the time, to, when I moved to my chair at Oxford, to considering the detailed claims of the Christian religion as opposed to the mere theism, which I had considered before, and wrote books on the atonement, Christian doctrine of the atonement, Christian doctrine of the nature of God, Christian doctrine of revelation, and later, though not part of the original set, a book on the resurrection and the evidence for that. And I applied my earlier results about what is evidence what to the propositions of the Christian religion. And books on 1 or 2 other philosophical topics as well. I wrote a book on epistemic justification, which is really a development of the ideas in the introduction to confirmation theory about what makes one theory probable and not another one. In all these cases, there was a philosophical theory which the truth of the doctrine depended on, and I adopted a philosophy first policy. That is to say, I looked at the theory at stake, and I tried to reach a right view about that before going on. In the main point was I looked at the theory of what made a belief justified, and I developed a theory. It was justified if it was probably true on the evidence, and if you looked for the evidence, and so on. And then when I went on to consider Christian doctrines and wrote about the atonement, I considered secular doctrines of what we should do if we wrong somebody, and how we should make atonement to them in a secular context, and then applied it to the doctrine of Christ making atonement for the sins of the human world. And in Revelation, I examined how sentences have a meaning and how the meaning varies with the context of their utterance, and so how the Bible should be understood in the light of when it was written and circumstances. But I then, for the rest, in recent years, I turned my attention to the Christian doctrine of the nature of human beings, that they are responsible for their actions, and that they can have a life after death. And in consequence, I looked at the philosophical issues and arguments for views about free will and views about the relation of mind and body. And that is why I have written the books I have. I hope that they have served their religious purpose, but they also have a secular purpose in that they have examined a lot of popular philosophical theories and come up with answers, as I suppose, to the philosophical issues themselves.
Richard, that was really wonderful. Let me ask you a series of questions, and please, this is kind of broad question. Try to give a short answer. Over this whole time, what would you say was the most challenging or difficult topic you've dealt with?
Well, the most difficult one I've dealt with is what most people consider the most difficult one for religion, and that is the problem of suffering. Why, if God is perfectly good, is there such a lot of suffering in the world? I believe I have an answer to that. Um, uh, in my book, Providence, the Problem of Evil, but I didn't consider that altogether satisfactory. Recently, I have there has been published a dialogue on this topic between myself and an atheist philosopher, Jim Sturber, and what I said there, I think, is a more developed view, but it raises questions I would like to consider further. I think I have an answer to the question of animal suffering, but I'm rather doubtful about it, and I'd like to consider it a bit more.
What have been the primary criticisms of all your work?
Oh, goodness. Most people disagree with most of what I've said. And quite a lot of people agree with some of what I've said, but not the same people agree. Not the same people always.
Uh,
Oh,
what are
people have
some
said,
examples?
well, people have said all sorts of things. People have said that I'm committed to God, but not being a necessary being in the sense in which they understand necessary being. They say that my criteria don't apply to the existence of God because the criteria themselves are inadequate. They think that my doctrine of the atonement contains the view that forgiveness is not always obligatory. We should only forgive people if they want to be forgiven. And they've claimed that my views about the resurrection are historically unjustified, and my views about the soul are totally against modern physicalist views of the world, or which science has established, in their view, conclusively, and that my account of what free will consists in is, well, no reason to believe it. And I could enumerate
Yeah, and you of course have responded to each of these in your books or in philosophy.
Oh, yes, I have responded to all of it. Well, not all of it.
Have your
There
views?
have been more criticisms than I could possibly respond to, but I've responded to the main lines of argument, yes. I should say also, very importantly, I didn't mention, I have produced second editions of certainly the three books of the Philosophy of Theism, and also of my book Revelation, and I would hope to produce at least one other second edition, which in which I give my fuller thoughts, but also thoughts on uh, reaction to the general philosophical climate and current philosophical and scientific ideas which occurred since the first edition, when there's often 30 years difference between them. And I've also replied to critics, and I've also written two or three much simpler books to explain what I have said at a little lower level.
Are there any areas that you have changed your belief over time, not just giving a sharper argument, but actually changed a specific belief?
I'm afraid not very much. And that worries me, actually, because I think how improbable it is I would have got the right answers to start with. But of course, one must consider the arguments again, and I do. And with exceptions, I haven't changed my mind. But if you want exceptions, there are one or two. I have, when I started doing philosophy, really before even I wrote Space and Time, I believed that God was outside time, timeless. And I believed that because I thought Christianity held that view. But it then came home to me that it was not a creedal view, and many Christians didn't, in fact, hold that view, and it was quite unknown to the biblical authors. So I then looked at it at its merit, and I considered it didn't have any, and that God should be regarded as a being who did one thing at one time, another thing at another time, and so on. That's one thing I changed my mind about.
Any
about other things, I changed my mind about the soul, thinking at first it was made of soul matter, and then realizing that no, that wasn't the correct account. It wasn't made of anything at all. It was just a singularity. It's not, you can't offhand think of anything else. There are no doubt other things, but they don't strike me.
Do you have any regrets, and what open issues do you see? Questions that you have?
Oh, lots of open issues. I don't have any regrets about what I have written. No, none at all. There again, it may be my blindness. But there are open issues, certainly. One of the main difficulties that young people have with Christianity is that they think that its moral injunctions are racist, sexist, all sorts of ists, and that the traditional views on sex and marriage are just bigoted. I have occasionally expressed views on that, for which I have been well rebuked by many. But I'd like to go into that matter more fully and resolve my own views a little clearer. And it's an area many people are rather scared to discuss, but I would like to discuss further. I might change my mind about it. And in general, I would like to write a book about Christian moral teaching, the sort of actions that are commended by Christianity as opposed to those that are not.
Many thanks, Richard. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I learned some. I can't tell you I am a believer in all aspects of Christian theology, but I am a great believer in the kinds of explanations that you give, which I think are wonderful. Viewers can watch Richard Swinburne's more than 70 videos and 36 Closer to Truth TV episodes, as well as over 1,000 videos on philosophy of religion and philosophical theology on the Closer to Truth website and Closer to Truth YouTube channel. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and comment below. You can support Closer to Truth by subscribing. Closer to Truth is now accepting your tax-exempt donations. please come to closertotruth.com/donate. Thank you very much for supporting us, and thanks for watching.